Cyber Force Conversation. Sir? So our moderator will be Colonel Retired Chris Hollifield, former Special Advisor to USCYBERCOM and retired Army officer. We have Vice Admiral Retired T.J. White, former Commander of the Cyber National Mission Force and MCPA Advisor. Rear Admiral Retired Mark Montgomery, Executive Director of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission and MCPA Advisor. Welcome.
Hey, awesome. Hey, so thanks everybody for coming today. It is absolutely an honor for me to lead this panel. As an aside, I've looked at this problem of, the notion of a cyber service for some time, and it can be a contentious topic, a lot of strong opinions one way or the other. But the one commonality that I've seen as I've looked at it and talked to folks is, at the root, it is all about a passion for what's best for the nation. And as I've talked to our experts here last week about it, you can hear it, as they discuss kind of how they frame the problem, that it really comes from a place of what is best for the nation. So that to me is, what makes it such a pleasure to be here, to be part of that conversation, because it's no real hidden agendas. I'll kick it over here for introductions. We got it. Introductions.
So on my left is Mark Montgomery, commissioned out of University of Pennsylvania. Went into the Navy as a surface warfare officer, specifically a nuclear-trained surface warfare officer, so he's one of the smart ones across the service. The things that you really need to know about him. Service and duty at the White House, commanded a destroyer, commanded a destroyer squadron, commanded a strike group, and he and I served together at USCYBERCOM. He was the J3, I was the J2. He thought he was telling me what to do all the damn time, and I thought I was telling him what he shouldn't do all the damn time. And we're good friends, and look forward to it.
Thanks. Hey, I'm T.J. White. Went to the best vocational school in America, just down the road, the U.S. Naval Academy. And then, but most importantly, was a fantastic J2. I had great ones. I had Cruiser, Norm, I just was very lucky. But you were fantastic, special, good neighbor as well. Went on to run 10th Fleet and for the Navy, from my point of view, was one of the real leaders in getting the Navy to thinking about getting the Navy intelligence and cryptological core to think about cyber. And I think you're the proof that a information warfare specialist should always be leading 10th Fleet, and anything else is letting the Navy down. So I really appreciate being on the podium with you here. I've been upgraded. I mean, last year I was with the Army here speaking about it. Apparently they said that the inter-service rivalry was too much. So now the Army's moderating it.
All right, so let's jump into it. So and I'll come to you, TJ, for this first question. The first thing from an operational design perspective, that we want to do is, how do we frame the problem? How do you frame this problem as you look at it, for the audience?
Yeah, okay, so I think, is it about a cyber service? Is it about a cyber force? Is it about something that's in between? Or is it about recognizing that perhaps the nation is not generating the force that we think it needs to be generating? What changes can be made into the process or into the structure or into the mobilization capacity? So that I'm not quite sure what the simple question is, but I don't know that we've publicly arrived at agreement on what the question is.
Jump in on that. I think that's a great question. I think we are looking at a military service that we're going to call the cyber force, and that's how we label things. So it's about a service. This is really about how do we recruit, train, maintain, and retain the cyber force we need. That's called force generation. This is not a question about force employment. That's Cyber Command. I think it does a good job. It could probably do better in a few areas, but I think it overall, especially given what they're given, I think they do a good job. It's not about what's going on at the COCOMs with their teams. That's, again, force employment. This is about force generation. This is about things that we take for granted in the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. I just want to do one quick story. You've heard me say this. A couple of people around here probably have. You know, when you go to a unit that's doing, you know, real cyber engineering, you know, figuring out how to develop payloads and things to put into systems, the commanding officers are going to tell you a woeful tale that only a very small percentage of their people, the ones we spoke to, 6-7% of the people, are doing 95% of the work. It isn't that the other people aren't good Americans, it's that we did not recruit the right people to do this work. If I went to an F-35 squadron back when I was a strike group commander, and the CO told me, "Hey, good news, sir. I've got 5 kick-ass pilots. The other 20, I don't allow them to fly." The CO, XO, ops, I don't know how far I'd go down the line, but then I'd start working my way up the wing commander and the deputy CAG. Who knew this, right? It's just not acceptable in any normal. We don't have, like, our nuclear submarines are operated 20% by people who know what they're doing, 80% by people who don't. I mean, that would make me scared to live in San Diego.
Yeah, so Mark, I don't disagree with that, but I do think, and this is something that the audience has been talking about today and will last year and the next year, but there does seem to be something different about operations and sustainment and generation of capability and capacity, less employment in cyberspace. I think that the relationship at scale and the speed and how industry and the DoD and the services have to be engaged is necessary. But to me, it sounds like you're not opposed to something that looks like a better applied and adapted SOCOM model, or you're looking at something that says, you know, Cybercom, look, I was there. They're not the only ones who secure, operate, and defend service infrastructure. The services actually do the vast majority of that work. And I think there is inherently some value that the department saw in 2009-10, recognizing the immutability of offense and defense. That's the way it is at sea when you're the strike group commander, destroyer CO. That's the way it is for the expeditionary wing commander. That's the way it is for the MAGTF, for the MU. I just think that if we go too far in separating that, recognizing the services will always have to have that organic capacity. I don't know how to thread the needle, but I'm not sure that separate service is the only way.
Yeah, a few thoughts on that. We may not get out of this question, by the way. All right. So first, I think there is something unique about cyber. It is a uniquely human endeavor, right? More so than, I think more so, like, there's a point, look, I might struggle a little bit getting that F-22 off the ground. But once I got it off the ground, I actually think, I mean, it does fly itself, so I'll say that. But in addition, I think I can figure out eventually how to fire the weapons. Just give me a week or two of training. I might be okay. I'm not going to be able to design cyber tools anytime in the next decade. And with my brain at its state, maybe never. So I do think it's inherently personnel. I worry about the SOCOM model because I've heard this before, and I'm thinking to myself, like when I was planning ops, like if you and I were together and they told us, hey, we got to put the submarine 50 miles off of Pyongyang and off the North Korean coast and send a couple guys in to blow up a train trestle, I'm not going to think to myself, where's that Air Force Special Operations pilot? I want to get him on board that submarine right now. Instead, I'm going to say, where's a SEAL? A Navy. So it's a very specifically naval mission. But if you then said to me, hey, you and TJ get with Kathy Creighton and come up with a strike option, a cyber strike on that train trestle, I would not give a rat's behind who was what service the guy or gal was who did that mission, right? So there is not, I don't believe there's an intrinsically service-specific mission in cyber in the same way there is in the other service in SOCOM.
But it sounds like it sounds like that you're talking about offensive maneuver or deep reconnaissance or power projection, as opposed to force sustainment and what the services have to do in order to continuously generate the force, the things we cared about across the Pacific.
I think we need to study what would be in a cyber service, what kind of mission sets it would drive the size. I do think it is closer to the size of the NMF, not even the NMF, the CMF, sorry, the Cyber Mission Force, probably around 10 or 12, and some recruiters and some trainers and things like that, around 10 or 12,000. I will say this, I'm glad you brought up 2009. I have trouble thinking back 15 years, but I was one of the Navy negotiators for Admiral Locklear, and I'll promise you, I was told 2,100, don't go one number above that, right? I think in the end, it was 2,100, and a few years later, it leveled at 2,200. But the total number was like 6,400 to 6,600. That was 2009 for the threat we had in 2009. And as I look now at 2024, I think the numbers, it's changed 200 because of how we count people, NSA people, and there it's about 64, 6,600. I'll just generously say the threat's changed a crap ton in 15 years, but our number of forces haven't. Why is that? Because the services aren't going to, they're not giving up any more people, because that's a squadron of aircraft maintainers, a ship of sailors, but a couple companies of Army guys. The services are not committed to what is the vision of a cyber service. They're committed to what's the vision of an Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines, and what is intrinsically a cyber mission set. I don't think the services can be trusted. Look, 15 years of not growing it, I think that's I think it's a clinical definition of insanity to think the services are suddenly going to give a crap, now.
Well, look, I think we would agree that 61, 87, and 133 teams is insufficient. They are presently more than that, than they were, so some small growth. But look, I'm probably a fan if you're going to go bold. So whatever the cyber mission force is at present, it should be 5x that as a minimum condition. So I don't think it's 12,000. I think it's more like 30,000.
Do you think the services will ever do that on their own?
I think the services can be compelled, like they were compelled by Congress to do that in 1986 for SOCOM.
By whom? Yeah,
By Congress.
Okay. I would just say, that's not DOD's answer, by the way. DOD's answer is, we don't want a cyber service. We want you to compel us to increase our size by 500%.
So I wish I would have brought a whistle to this. This is awesome. Hey, so as we look at any negotiation, let's start with the zone of potential agreement here. Do we agree that status quo is not the way forward? We have to do something. Right? So as you frame the problem and acknowledge that we collectively have not done a great job of clarifying what that problem is, there are some thoughts on how to go about it, but the status quo is not the right way forward. Fair?
Yeah, so I'll answer the question I want to answer, not the one you want me to.
Of course.
Yeah, so the present circumstance is insufficient to the mission and the need that the nation has to be secure and resilient and ready in cyberspace. And I think there's been improvement, not enough. There's been some change, insufficient. But I also think that Cybercom hasn't yet had an opportunity to fully actualize all of the authorities and aligned responsibilities and funding that Mark has been a giant proponent of them getting over the last 4 to 5 years.
So that's a great segue, and I'm coming to you next. You both have a lot of experience from a senior leader perspective doing a risk assessment, right? So where do you see, as you do the calculus for risk, where we are right now, how do you assign kind of your weighting for where are we taking on risk, where can we go forward to mitigate that risk?
Yeah, I think the risk is that we are not, it's twofold. One is an offensive risk where we're not operationally preparing the battlefield. I think, look, this is a guy that would know it's 5X. I'm not smart enough to know if it's 5X, but I think it's at least 3X. And, what that means is we have 1/3 or 1/5 the number of operational actors we need. I do think that number would be lower if they were all the right people brought in. I think we'd get a higher PK or K effective out of each player if we were recruiting if we were recruiting outside the robotics lab and and the and down in the hovel where they do e-gaming, and a little less recruiting of our cyber professionals outside the football locker room. Not that football players can't be cyber. I mean, sure, there's got to be an exception out there. I think there's at least one in Tyson, but I think we can get it up. So I agree with that 3x, 5x. So with that said, I think I would say, first of all, the status quo is not acceptable. I believe Paul Nakasone said that very directly near the end. He wouldn't agree with me that we need a cyber service, but we'd all agree that the current method of force generation is not generating the forces we need. And so the first risk is, as I said, we're not operationally preparing the environment. I don't know that we have enough cyber target sets in China, Russia, North Korea, Iran to support what we need. And then the second part's the harder part. If we had that done, we could then start thinking about how we use our offensive operators to protect our own critical infrastructure. Right now, we don't even have to have that's a very hard legal discussion. Not necessary, because there's no bodies to do it. Even if you could somehow, you'd have to first take care of your offensive side before you brought these guys in. But I do think there's eventually going to be a role, and not just for the Guard, not just for whatever CISA call it, their hurt teams, not just for the Coast Guard, who does have some offensive, but eventually our Title X forces are going to be part of defending our national critical infrastructure in cyberspace, just like they are, by the way, in missile defense, just like they are in anti-submarine warfare. If something's threatening the United States homeland, the military is going to defend it. But right now, we don't have to think about that because we don't even have the capacity to do the offensive side. But once we get that right, the active defense of our national critical infrastructure is going to fall on these forces. And that's a real big thing. There's a whole lot of legislation and laws and court cases to get there. But we don't even have to worry about it because we can't do crap we can't do the first mission first. That's the risk.
Yeah, so you see it as, risk to mission.
Yeah, to cut it down to one word, risk to mission.
Yeah, so do you see it from a different lens?
No, look, I think the purpose is the mission, and we don't have the force to do the mission. So I think Mark's assessment there, and bottom line, is not inaccurate, and I don't disagree with that. From the nation standpoint, from the DoD standpoint, look, we choose to play an away game. We've had the luxury of doing that since, basically 1919 or whatever. 1812, I guess, technically. But, that's the way we want to do it. That's the way we like to do it. That's the way we have done it. That's not the way it is today, right? So full Typhoon, or take your pick of any number of nation-state actors, they are in our infrastructure now. So I do think Mark makes a compelling case that we need to figure out how to defend the homeland better than we're doing now. And whether that's the DoD or, DHS CISA, or some combination of both, absolutely. I do think, though, that we would be naturally inclined to do the things we talk about in terms of promoting deterrence, preserving decision space and options for the president and the secretary and combatant commanders if we were, in fact, holding more targets at risk. And if you want to hold targets at risk, which I think is a feature of deterrence, then you need to have the forces and the capacity and the capability and the infrastructure, a platform to do that from.
So some may assign a different level of risk of attempting to create from whole cloth a new organization at a time when, we have, an inherent risk with, our pacing challenge, China. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I know we're on a clock, and Mark, I think, probably has some actually very well-developed thoughts on this because he's been in this space for a while. My concern with the DoD is that they will fight change as hard as they possibly can so that whatever change happens is going to, in fact, be suboptimal. It won't advance the plan or contribute to a credible solution to the problem. Consequently, if you're going to go to a cyber service or a cyber force, I don't think the answer, if told that that was the answer at the back of the book, is to fold up a new service inside an existing department within the Department of Defense. And there's a lot of rhetoric out there that says the ground has been prepared for a cyber service to be part of the Department of the Army as one of two services in the Department of the Army, like you have two services in the Department of the Air Force and two services in the Department of the Navy. I think if you're going to go, you need to go hard. and think about doing an entirely new department inside the DoD. I think it's appropriate to be inside the DoD, and that you have the constituency of one. Two, the DoD must be compelled to identify all resources, loosely, billets and dollars associated with anything and everything to do with cyber, whether it is secure, operate, defend, exploit, or attack. You can then have a discussion which is informed about how to slice and dice and group and organize and partition wherever you want to put it and whatever you want to assign it. And then I think the third thing is, as a nation, and everyone in this room can be an advocate however you choose to do it, simply, if you agree, calmly and responsibly talking about, in cyberspace, we are in conflict now. And if you don't like that word, then we are absolutely being contested for normal daily operations in the nation.
You know, one thing I'd say, I agree that DoD won't do this on their own. To me, there's been like 5 major changes in DoD since 1947. They created the Air Force, they desegregated the force, they did Goldwater Nichols, they created SOCOM, reverse that order, and they created the Space Force. DoD successfully or unsuccessfully fought all 5. I would just say they are consistent, consistently wrong, and so my thought process on this is that I'm for an independent assessment. If it arrives at your solution, great. I would, if I was a member of the board, which I wouldn't be, when they get an independent assessment, I'll intentionally not try to be on it. But I would not have selected that because DoD's, one of their arguments is, oh, this is going to be such a burden on the department, while we're engaged in combat with China right now. My answer is the China threat when's the lull in combat with China that you will do this? And the answer is never. But I would try to minimize the impact. And I think creating a whole new department is too much impact. One of the things we really need in force generation is civilian oversight of that force generation, and that's where the Army staff comes in. First of all, I think they're doing the best job of the services currently on the civilian oversight of their development. But the second thing I would do, it would cost quite a bit of money to create a separate cyber force, and which DoD would then use as a reason to delay and slow it down. But the other thing I'd say is I'm really worried about acquisition. The HASC and SAS staffers, with my and other support, have done something slightly illegitimate, which is the services were so crappy at acquiring cyber infrastructure that we began to give cyber infrastructure acquisition to Cyber Command. It started at $75 million. I believe it's about $750 million now. I'll gently say its civilian oversight is of question, right? They just don't have a civilian service oversighting that. The last time we did that was SOCOM. They built something called the ASDS, the Advanced Submarine Delivery System, which was a $2 billion fiasco in Idaho that eventually burned to the ground, and we got nothing for it. COCOM acquisition is not the way forward. Service acquisition is the way forward under a service dedicated to doing it. So I would like to see it, whether it's a singular service on its own or it's part of the Army, whether it's in DoD or not part of DoD, that's why you have an independent study. Final thing I'll say is, I helped write the TikTok legislation. I knew we won when TikTok removed all transparency to the results of their algorithm. In other words, they no longer wanted to compete in an open, transparent environment. I know we're winning on this because DoD doesn't want to compete in an open, transparent environment. They won't respond to reports. I think Congress has given them 5 reporting requirements since 2019 about whether you need an independent service or a change in this. And they have failed to deliver on any of them in any meaningful way over the 5 years since. So that lack of transparency tells me DoD doesn't have a good answer. They just don't want to hear yours.
Yeah, I think I understand that CyberCom will deliver to the Secretary the results of a study. Your point, perhaps not as transparent as we might like, and perhaps not as independent as we might like, but I do think there's a response coming to the Secretary and to Congress.
That's on 1 of 5, yeah. And having had at least some look at drafts, I'm not holding my breath on the complexity of the answer.
So let's jump back, and I'm going to come, Mark, back to you for this. You said a couple times, so it seems like you're very much in favor of, the independent study. You don't want to get out ahead of what that would look like, but do you have any thoughts on kind of your vision of what success? What does winning look like in this space? Any interesting models that you've seen that bear, worth looking at, as you've studied the problem?
What in this space?
Yeah. So what models? Any models that you've seen? What is your vision or key tasks that would go into it?
So it's hard. Look, Dr. Erica Borgard-Lonergan from adjunct or assistant professor up at Columbia, but a lot of you know her for Army Cyber Institute, and she worked with me on the commission. She and I wrote a pretty good paper, but in the end, we gave ideas of what it should look like, but we're not the right. You need people who are in there with the readiness data, the most current readiness data, the most current force structure data to kind of get to that, and a license to push. I mean, some of the things we found out in our interviews were, some services moving their talented people around between CPTs so that a CPT could get certified. I certainly, if you did that in Rickover's Navy, there would have been some repercussions, I'd gently say. So I think you need someone to give a really good, hard look at that, and that will help you organize it. I can't tell you how many recruiters it takes to recruit 742 operators a year, or whatever the number you task yourself. How many people does it take to train 742 people through basic, and then 370 people through a mid-level training? Someone needs to figure those things out. We gave some guesses on it, educated guesses based on my career and her experience in cyber, and some outside people we went to. But I think that you have to get those forces together. And TJ's right. It sounds like an offense. At first, it's your offensive maneuver force. I think it's a little more than that. But that's where you start. I mean, I would start somewhere around, I transferring 10 and 12,000 people into the cyber service. And then I would tell them, just like Space Force started out 16 to 17,000, and targets after 5 years being at 23,000, because that was one of the complaints, was they weren't being grown properly by the Air Force, who had other inhibitors on the program. This same 10 to 12,000, the cyber service commander working with the cybercom commander and the COCOMs who have CMTs and CPTs would then produce a 5-year plan to get, I think, to about 16 to 17,000. Take a pause, make sure you got it right, make sure that Fort Eisenhower can handle it or wherever you have this, and then move on.
Same question to you. I know you mentioned the SOCOM model, the functional command. Any other thoughts on kind of the model?
So I think the best people to consult on this would be current and previous combatant commanders or previously subunified. I think there's a lot of applicability to SOCOM model, not exclusively and only, could be adapted and improved. I think what the commanders would say they need is agility. They likely have the authorities necessary and improved resources and alignment to the same. I think they would be happy to get more mass and scale, but they don't want to compromise the standards. On the training point, Mark, one of the things I think I would observe about the force, the Navy's experience with the cyber warfare engineers, they grew from 20 to 80, and they were the most emphatic about not relaxing that standard. They successfully recruited them. They're getting them, they are retaining them, the ones they want, and they have not relaxed the standard, so I think it's possible. I also think in this space, I don't know that the traditional, look, Navy nuke power rightly gets props for arguably the best at scale, consistent technical training in the DoD, if not the nation for anything. But in this space, cohort learning seems to be secret power. And when you get like-minded folks that are cultured and trained, ethos to do this mission, they will come together and they can advance the plan and capability a lot. Last, I do think there's an opportunity for something that looks like a cyber auxiliary. I don't know what that would be and how it would be formed, but there's scalability there as well.
In the SOCOM model, and you'll appreciate this as the 10th Fleet Commander, when you showed up in the room and Navy Special Warfare showed up in the room with the CNO with an ask for budget money, I'll just gently say, you never won, right? Look, the services, and I say this, I was guilty of it as a line officer. The services treat special warfare differently than they treat cyber warfare. Rightly or wrongly, there's a history of that. So the idea of then having a functional commander, a functional commander thing under SOCOM or Cybercom as that, I still think you have the same problem where you just, and this is, we had a CNO who was a COCOM, it was a Cybercom J3. And we still couldn't deliver. In fact, I would say we definitely didn't deliver under those events. So I'm a little worried equating this to the code. That there's some special sauce in special forces that is not going to be easy to replicate.
Look, so I think that's right, but when it comes to resources, if the department doesn't care to invest in the full scope of cyber mission capability and requirement, then they're not going to do it if there is a separate service. They need to do it at present. They're simply underinvesting at scale across the board. And you know, we've always had difficulty saying what is a pound of cyber worth and what does a pound of cyber do, and what would replacing that $1.2+ billion destroyer actually buy for the Navy.
All right, so the big hook's coming out. Clearly, we could go on for another 30 minutes, an hour on this, but gents, appreciate the conversation today. We'll look for, I guess, version 2 of this at some time in the future.
You bet.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mark.
Just be careful.